Waylander, Chapter 7. The old fort had only 3 good walls, each 20 feet high, the fourth having been partially stripped by villagers using the stones for foundations. Now the village was deserted, and the fort stood like a crippled guard over the remains. The keep, such as it was damp and cold, part of the roof having fallen in some years before, and there was some evidence that the central chamber had been used as a cattle store, the stench remaining long after the animals had been moved. Gellin had the carts moved into place against the exposed fourth wall, providing a barrier of sorts against Vagrian attack, and the rain pounded down, lashing the stone of the ancient battlements and making them glisten like marble. Lightning blazed across the night sky and thunder rumbled in the east as Gellin drew his cloak about him and stared to the north. Savage climbed the creaking rotted steps to the battlements and moved alongside the officer. "I hope you are right," he said, but Gellin did not respond. His despair was almost complete. On the first day he had been convinced the Vagrians would find them. On the second his worries had grown. On the third he had allowed himself some hope that they would arrive in Chptr to a fanfare of triumph. Then the rain had struck, bogging down the wagons in a sea of mud. At that point he should have destroyed the supplies and made a run for the forest. He knew that now. But he had dithered too long, and the Vagrians had circled ahead of him. There had been time to cut and run, as Jonat had pointed out, but by then Gellin had become obsessed with bringing the supplies to Eagle. He had hoped there would be fewer than 200 Vagrians opposing him, and had turned the wagons west to the ruined fort of Mason. 50 men could hold the fort for perhaps 3 days against a force of 200. In the meantime, he had sent 3 riders to Chptr requesting urgent aid. But Gellin's luck was running true to form. His scouts reported that the force opposing him was 500, and the chances were they would be overrun on the first assault. The scouts had been sent to Eagle, and no one at the fort knew of the enemy's strength. Gellin felt like a traitor for not informing Savage, but morale was a delicate beast at best. "We can hold," said Gellin at last, "even if they have more men than we think. The western wall is rotten." "I think an angry child could push it in," said Savage. "The wagons don't make much of a barrier. They'll do." "So you think 200? "Maybe 3, admitted Gellin. "I hope not. Remember the manual, Savage, and I quote, 'Good fortifications can be held against an enemy 10 times the strength of the defending force.' I don't like to argue with a superior officer, but didn't the manual say 5 times? We'll check it when we reach Chptr." Jonat is complaining again, but the men are glad to be under cover. They have a fire going in the keep. Why don't you go inside for a while? "You're getting concerned about my old bones?" "I think you should rest. Tomorrow could get a little tense." "Yes, you're right. Keep the sentries alert, Savage. I'll do my best." Gellin walked to the steps, then returned. "There are over 500 Vagrians," he said. "I guessed that," said Savage. "Get some sleep, and watch out for those steps. I say a prayer every time I mount them." Gellin made his way gingerly down the steps and across the cobbled courtyard to the keep. The hinges of the gates had rusted through, but the soldiers had wedged the doors in place. Gellin squeezed through and made his way to the huge hearth. The fire was welcome, and he warmed his hands against the blaze. The men had fallen silent as he entered. Then one of them, Vanek, approached him. "We lit a fire for you, sir, in the eastern room. There's a pallet bed if you wanted to catch some sleep." "Thank you, Vanek. Jonat, will you join me for a moment?" The tall, bony Jonat pushed himself to his feet and followed the officer. Savage had been complaining again, he guessed, preparing his arguments. Once inside the small room, Gellin removed his cloak and breastplate and stood before the crackling fire. "You know why I promoted you?" Gellin asked. "Because you thought I could handle it?" ventured Jonat. "More than that. I knew you could. I trust you, Jonat." "Thank you, sir," said Jonat uneasily. "So let me tell you, and I want you to keep it to yourself for tonight, that there are at least 500 Vagrians ranged against us. We'll never hold. I hope that we will, for Eagle needs these supplies. 3 days is all it will take. I want you to hold the western wall. Pick 20 men, the best archers, the finest swordsmen, but hold it. We should have cut and run. We still could. Eagle has 4,000 men, and they are short of equipment, food, and medicines. The people of Chptr are going hungry to supply them, but it cannot go on. I checked the wagons tonight. You know there are over 20,000 shafts, spear bows, swords and spears, also salt meats, dried fruits, and more than 100,000 silver pieces. 100. It's their pay. Exactly. But with it, Eagle can open trade links even with the Nadir. No wonder they sent 500 men to recover it. I'm surprised they didn't send 1,000. We'll make them wish they had, said Gellin. Can you hold the western wall with 20 men? I can give it a try. That's all I ask. After Janet had gone, Gellin lay back on the pallet bed. It smelt of dust and decay, but it felt finer than a silk-covered four-poster. Gellin fell asleep 2 hours before dawn. His last waking thought was of the children, on the day he had taken them to play in the mountains. If only he had known it was their last day together, he would have made it so different for them. He would have hugged them and told them he loved them. The storm passed during the night, and the dawn sky was clear of cloud, a brilliant spring blue. Gellin was awoken within the hour when riders were seen to the east. He dressed swiftly and shaved, then made his way to the wall. 2 horses could be seen in the distance, moving slowly and heavily laden. As they neared, Gellin saw that one horse carried a man and a woman, while the second bore a man and 2 children. When they approached, he waved them round to the ruined gates of the western wall, and ordered the wagons pulled back so as to allow the horses to enter. Go and question them, he ordered Savage. The young soldier descended to the courtyard as the group were dismounting, and was drawn instantly to the man in the black leather cloak. He was a tall man, with dark grey streaked hair, and eyes so deep a brown there appeared to be no trace of pupils. His face was set and grim, and he moved with care, always balanced. In his hand he held a small black crossbow, and several knives hung on his broad belt. Good morning, said Savage. Have you travelled far? Far enough, answered the man, turning his gaze to the wagons being pulled back in place. It might be safer for you to move on. No, the man said quietly. Vagary and outriders are everywhere. They are hunting us, said Savage. The man nodded and moved towards the battlements, while Savage turned to the other man with a young woman and 2 children. Welcome to Masson, he said, extending his hand, which Dardalian shook warmly. Savage bowed to Danielle, then squatted down before the children. My name is Savage, he told them, removing his plumed helm. Frightened, the sisters hugged Danielle's skirt and turned their heads away. I've always been good with children, he said with a wry smile. They have suffered a great deal, said Danielle, but they will be better in a little while. Do you have any food? How remiss of me. Come this way. He took them into the keep, where the cook was preparing breakfast of hot oats and cold pork, and they sat at the makeshift table. The cook served them with plates of oats, but the children, after one taste, pushed the dishes away. It's horrible, said Muriel. One of the men sitting nearby came to the table. What's wrong with it, Princess? It's sour, she said. You have some sugar hidden in your hair. Why don't you sweeten it? I haven't any sugar, she said. The man leaned forward, ruffled her hair, and then opened his hand to show a tiny leather sack sitting on his palm. He unfastened it and poured some sugar on the oats. Is there sugar in my hair? Asked Krilla eagerly. No, Princess, but I'm sure your sister would not mind sharing hers. He added the rest of his small store to Krilla's plate, and the sisters began to eat. Thank you, said Danielle. A pleasure, my lady. I am Vanek. You are a kind man. I like children, he said, then moved back to his table. Danielle noticed that he walked with a slight limp. A horse fell on him about 2 years ago, said Savage. Crushed his foot. He's a good man. Do you have spear weapons here? Asked Dardalian. We captured some Vagrian supplies. There are swords, bows, and breastplates. Must you fight, Dardalian? Asked Danielle. Reading the concern in her voice, Savage switched his gaze to the young man. He looked strong enough, though his face was gentle. More of a scholar than a warrior, thought Savage. He reached out and took Danielle's hand, saying nothing. You don't have to fight, sir, said Savage. It's not obligatory. Thank you, but I have chosen my path. Would you help me choose a weapon? I'm not skilled in such matters. Of course. Tell me about your friend. What would you like to hear? Asked Dardalian. Savage grinned. He seems more of a loner, he said lamely. Not someone I would expect to see in the company of women and children. He saved our lives, said Dardalian, and that speaks more highly of him than his looks. Indeed it does, admitted Savesh. What is his name? Dicyrus, said Dardalian swiftly. Savesh caught the look on Danielle's face and did not press the matter. There were far more important issues at stake than a change of name. It was likely that Dicyrus was an outlaw, which 6 months ago would have meant something. Now it was immaterial. He spoke of Vagrian outriders. Did you see them? There were just under 500 soldiers, said Dardalian. They were camped in a gully to the northeast. Were? They moved out an hour before dawn, seeking sign of your wagons. You know a great deal about their movements. I am a mystic, once a priest of the source. And you want weapons? I have experienced a change of perspective, Savesh. Can you see where the Vagrians are now? Dardalian closed his eyes, resting his head on his elbows. Seconds later, he opened them again. They have found the tracks where you cut to the west. Now they are moving this way. What regiment are they? I have no idea. Describe their armour. Blue cloaks, black breastplates, and helms that cover their faces. Are the visors clear or embossed? On the forehead is an image of a snarling wolf. Thank you, Dardalian. Excuse me. Savesh rose from the table and returned to the battlements where Gellin was supervising the distribution of arrows to the men. Quivers of 50 shafts allocated to each archer. Savesh removed his helm and ran his fingers through his thinning hair. You trust this man? Asked Gellin after Savesh had given him the news. I would say that he is honest. I could be wrong. We will know within the hour. Yes, but if he's right, we're up against the hounds. They are men, Savesh. There's nothing supernatural about them. It's not the supernatural that worries me, said the soldier. It's the fact that they always win. Waylander unsaddled his horse, stowing his saddlebags inside the keep. Then he took his weapons to the decaying battlements of the western wall. 6 throwing knives and 2 quivers of bolts for his crossbow he left leaning against the ramparts. Then he saw Dardalian and Savesh standing at a wagon below the eastern wall. Here the wagons had been drawn in a line to create a pen for the oxen. Waylander strolled across the courtyard. Dardalian had put aside the sword and scabbard he had taken from the dead robber, and had selected a sabre of blue steel. The broadsword had been too heavy for the slender priest. Savesh produced a breastplate from under the tarpaulin. It was wrapped in oilskin, and when he brought it out into the sunshine, it shone like silver. A Vagrian officer of the Blue Riders, said Savesh. Made to order. Try it on. Delving deeper into the depths of the wagon, he pulled clear a large parcel. Ripping it open, he discovered a white cloak trimmed with leather. You'll stand out like a dove among crows, said Waylander. But Dardalian merely grinned and swept the cloak over his shoulders. Shaking his head, Waylander climbed onto the wagon where he selected 2 short swords of blue steel and matching black scabbards. These he threaded to his belt. The edges were dull, and he moved away to the battlements to hone them. When Dardalian joined him, Waylander blinked in mock belief. A white horsehair-plumed helmet was buckled at the chin, and the leather-trimmed cloak lay over a shimmering breastplate embossed with a flying eagle. A leather kilt, studded with silver, protected Dardalian's thighs, while silver greaves were buckled to his calves. By his side hung a cavalry sabre, and on his left hip a long, curved knife sat in a jewelled scabbard. You look ridiculous, said Waylander. Most probably, but will it serve? It will serve to draw the Vagrians to you like flies to a cowpath. I do feel rather foolish. Then take it off and find yourself something less garish. No, I can't explain why, but this is right. Then keep away from me, priest. I want to stay alive. Will you not get yourself some armour? I have my mail shed. I don't intend to stand in one place long enough to be cut. I would appreciate some advice on swordsmanship, said Dardalian. Gods of mercy, snapped Waylander. It takes years to learn, and you have an hour, maybe 2. There's nothing I can teach you. Just remember, throat and groin. Protect your own, slice theirs. By the way, I told Savesh, the soldier who greeted us, that your name was Dicyrus. It does not matter, but thank you anyway. I'm sorry that saving me has brought you to this, said Dardalian. I brought myself to this. Don't blame yourself. Just try to stay alive, priest. I am in the hands of the source. Whatever. Keep the sun to your back. That way you'll blind them with your magnificence. And get yourself a canteen of water. You'll find war dries the throat. Yes, I'll do that now. No more speeches, Dardanian. Fetch yourself some water and position yourself down there by the wagons. That is where the action will be. I feel I ought to say something. I owe you my life. But the words are all trapped inside me. You need say nothing. You are a good man, priest. And I am glad I saved you. Now, for pity's sakes, go away. Dardalian returned to the courtyard, and Waylander strung his crossbow, testing the strings for tension. Satisfied, he laid it gently on the stone rampart. Then, taking a short length of rawhide, he tied back his hair at the nape of the neck. A young bearded soldier approached. "Good morning, sir. My name is Jonat. This is my section." "Decorous," said Waylander, extending his hand. "Your friend looks dressed for a royal banquet." It was the best he could find, but he'll stand firm. "I'm sure that he will. Do you intend to stay up here?" "That is what I had in mind," said Waylander dryly. "It's just that this is the best spot to cover the gap, and I would prefer to place one of my archers here." "I can understand that," said Waylander, picking up his crossbow and drawing back the upper string. Snapping a bolt in place, he glanced down at the wagon blocking the ruined gate. The wagon tongue had been pushed up, making a cross with the oxen bar. Waylander pulled back the lower string, slipping a bolt into position. "How wide would you say the bar is?" asked Waylander. "Narrow enough to make a difficult target," agreed Janet. Waylander's arm came up, and a black bolt flashed through the air to punch its way through the right-hand bar. A second bolt thudded into the left side. "Interesting," commented Janet. "May I try it?" Waylander handed him the weapon, and Janet turned it over in his hands. It was beautifully constructed. Loading only one arrow, Janet sighted on the centre tongue and let fly. The arrow glanced from the wood and hit the cobblestones of the courtyard, sending a shower of sparks into the air. "Nice weapon," said Janet. "I would love to practice with it." "If anything happens to me, you can have it," said Waylander. Janet nodded. "You'll be staying here then?" "I think so." Suddenly, from the eastern wall came a shout of warning, and Janet ran to the battlement steps, joining the stream of men rushing to see the enemy. Waylander settled back against the ramparts. He had seen armies before. He took a swig from his canteen and swished the warm water around his mouth before swallowing it. On the eastern wall, Gellin and Savage were joined by Janet. Out on the plain, some 600 Vagrian horsemen came into view, and 2 scouts rode from the enemy ranks, galloping their horses to the western wall. Then they returned. For several minutes nothing happened as the Vagrian officers dismounted and sat together at the centre. Then one rose and remounted. "Talk time," muttered Savage. The officer rode to the eastern wall, his hand raised. Lifting his helm from his head, he called out, "I am Rajik. I speak for the Earl Sioris. Who speaks for the Dreadnought?" "I do," shouted Gellin. "Your name?" "It is no business of yours. What do you have to say?" "As you can see, you are vastly outnumbered. The Earl Sioris offers you the opportunity to surrender." "On what condition?" "Once your weapons have been surrendered, you will be free to go." "Very generous." "Then you agree?" "I have heard of the Earl Sioris. It is said that his word is given as lightly as the promise of a Lentrian whore. The man has no honour." "Then you refuse?" "I don't deal with jackals," said Gellin. "That is a decision you will live to rue," shouted the herald, pulling on the reins and spurring his horse back to the enemy line. "I think he's probably right about that," muttered Jonat. "Ready the men. The Vagrians have no ropes or siege equipment, and that means they must attack the breach. Savage?" "Sir." "Leave only 5 men per wall, the rest to go with Jonat. Do it now." Savage saluted and moved from the battlements. Jonat followed him. "We should have cut and run," said Jonat. "Give your mouth a rest," snapped Savage. The Vagrians heeled their horses to the right and cantered round to face the western wall, then advanced until they were just beyond bowshot. Dismounting, the men thrust their lances into the earth and tied their mounts to them. Then, lifting shields and drawing swords, they advanced slowly. Dardalian watched them come and licked his lips. His hands were sweating, and he wiped them on his cloak. Jonat grinned at him. "Handsome horse sons, aren't they?" Dardalian nodded. The men around him were tense, and the priest realized he was not alone in his fear. Even Jonat's eyes were burning more brightly, and his face was set. Dardalian glanced up to where Waylander sat with his back to the wall, setting out crossbow bolts before him. He alone was not watching the advancing soldiers. A man to the right loosed a shaft that sailed towards the Vagrians. An enemy soldier lifted his shield, and the arrow glanced from it. "Hold until I order it," bellowed Jonat. With a sudden roar, the Vagrians charged. Dardalian swallowed hard and drew his swords. With the enemy a bare 30 feet from the breach, Jonat bellowed, "Now!" Shafts hammered into the advancing line, but most were turned aside by the brass-rimmed round shields. Others glanced from black helms, but several of the enemy fell as the barbed shafts cut into unprotected necks. A second volley sliced home as the Vagrians gained the breach, and this time more than a dozen warriors fell back. Then they were at the wagons. A burly soldier clambered over the wooden frame with sword raised, but Waylander's bolt punched through his helm above his right ear, and he fell without a sound. A second bolt skewered the neck of the soldier behind him. Jonat had placed defenders well. A dozen knelt on the northern battlements, losing shaft after shaft into the enemy as they struggled to clear the wagons, while 20 more archers stood in the courtyard picking off the enemy with ease. The bodies mounted, but still the Vagrians pushed on. Waylander heard a scrabbling noise behind him and swung round to see a hand grasp the ramparts as a Vagrian soldier pulled himself over the wall. Another followed, and another. Waylander cocked his bow and fired, and the first soldier pitched backwards and rolled from the battlements. The second took a bolt through the shoulder but ran on, screaming his hatred. The assassin dropped his bow and dragged his sword from its scabbard, blocking a downward cut. Then he kicked out to catch the man in the groin. As the soldier staggered, Waylander hammered a blow to his neck, and with blood gushing from the wound, the man toppled to the courtyard below. Waylander dropped to his knees as another warrior aimed a vicious blow to his head. He stabbed upwards, feeling the blade sink into the man's groin. Waylander kicked him from the battlements and faced another soldier, but the man suddenly pitched forward with an arrow jutting from the back of his neck. A Drenai soldier stepped from the doorway of the tower, bow in hand. He grinned at Waylander and limped forward. Below, 4 Vagrians finally burst through the crossfire and leapt into the courtyard. Jonat killed the first with a reverse cut to the neck. Dardalian ran forward, heart pounding, and thrust his sword at an enemy warrior. The man brushed the blade aside and crashed his shield into the priest. Dardalian fell back, tripping on the cobbles. The Vagrian lashed out, and the priest rolled clear as the blade clanged against the stones. Pushing himself to his feet, Dardalian drew his second sword and faced the warrior. The man advanced, his sword stabbing towards Dardalian's groin. The priest parried the blade with his right-hand sword, stepped forward, and thrust his left-hand blade into the man's throat. Blood bubbled from under the black helm, and he fell to his knees. "Look out!" yelled Waylander. But Dardalian's sword came up too late, and a second Vagrian soldier ran forward, crashing a blow to his head. The blade glanced from the silver helm and thundered to his shoulder. Dazed, he stumbled back, and the Vagrian moved in for the kill. Jonat dispatched another man, then swung to see Dardalian in trouble. He ran forward and leapt feet first at the attacker, catapulting him from his feet. Jonat scrambled up and threw himself on the man's back. Then, drawing a slender dagger, he tore the man's helm clear and cut his throat. A single bugle blast pierced the battle clamour, and the Vagrians pulled back out of bowshot. "Clear away the bodies!" shouted Jonat. Waylander retrieved his crossbow and counted the remaining bolts, 12. He climbed down to the courtyard and began searching the bodies, reclaiming 15 bolts that were usable. Dardalian sat with his back to the northern wall, dizzy and unable to stand. Waylander strolled over and knelt by his side. "Drink," he said. Dardalian weakly pushed the canteen back. "I feel sick." "You cannot sit there, priest. They'll be back within minutes. Get yourself to the keep." Dardalian pulled his legs under him and struggled to rise. Waylander pulled him upright. "Can you stand?" "No." "Lean on me then." "I did not perform too well, Waylander. You killed your first man in combat. It's a start." Together they made their way to the keep, and Waylander laid the priest down on a bench table. Danielle ran forward, her face white with shock. "He's not dead, merely dazed," said Waylander. Ignoring him, she moved to Dardalian, pulling his helm clear and examining the shallow cut to his head where the helm had dented. A bugle blast echoed over the plain. Waylander cursed softly and made for the door.